Hi, I'm Roger, and this is part 2 of making hive frames. In part 1 we did the end bars, this part right here, and in this part we're going to do the bottom bar and the top bar. We're going to start off with the bottom bar because I still have the table saw set up from ripping all these end bar pieces. This is actually the easiest part of the frame to make. It's 3/4 of an inch wide. It is 3/8 of an inch thick. It has a 1/8 inch groove right down the center that is 5/16 deep. So I'll get these ripped up here and then we'll move on to how to cut the groove, how I set up for it, and after that we'll get into the top bar. Be right back. I have a bunch of pieces from my scrap bin and from crates and everything that are pre-cut to 17 3/4 inches wide or long, and all I need to do is rip them down on the saw here to pieces that are 3/8 of an inch thick. And so on. I'm not going to bore you with why I sit here and cut 200 of these, but I'm going to get these ripped up and then I'll get set up for cutting the groove and we'll be back. Okay, so got all these bottom bar pieces ripped up, got a whole box full of them here. I'll have to do a little bit of grading here as I go through because things with big knots in like this aren't going to be suitable for use at all. But I didn't want to stop as I was going through and doing them, so I can do them afterwards. Okay, what we need to do now in this step is cut this groove down the center. It has to be exactly in the center, so you'll want to put an 1/8 inch kerf blade in your table saw, preferably a rip blade. That's what I've got in here right now, is a Freud full kerf rip. You want to set it 5/16 of an inch high. That's 0.314 if you're using a height gauge. And it needs to be accurate. You don't want to overshoot because, as you can see, hopefully this will focus in, there's not a whole lot of material left at the bottom, so you don't want to cut it too deep. By the same token, you don't want to have it too shallow or your foundation won't fit in there correctly. The next thing you want is to set your fence 5/16 of an inch, again that's 0.314, from the outside kerf of the blade to the fence. That way you'll end up with an 1/8 inch in the middle and roughly 5/16 on both sides. I also use feather boards, and I'm going to re-aim the camera and aim them down at how I have the feather board set up on a high fence so I can run these through quickly. You don't have to do it this way. You could use one of these micro jig grippers and just push down on it as you go through. But I found out this to be a quick way to do it. And also there's zero chance of kickback because of the way the feather boards are set up on there. And I will move the camera and we'll zoom in and I'll show you how I do this. Okay, what we have, I have a raised fence that I added to my stock Vega fence on my saw here. I also put a T-track rail in it when I made it for things just like this. These or what they call feather boards. They got little fingers on them that flex just slightly as the work passes underneath them, and they will not let the work kick back the other way. So up here on the fence are two, one on the entrance, one on the exit. These are manufactured by Craig, but there's lots of other companies that make them. And this pushes down and keeps a constant down pressure. This one here, I believe this was made by Miles Craft. This is a feather board that fits into the miter slot, and as you tighten these two thumb screws up, it spreads these aluminum bars which locks it into the miter slot, and it's fully adjustable. And this is to keep the work against the fence so that it doesn't crawl away. So with this keeping it from crawling away, and this keeping it from trying to move up or kick back, what I do is I just feed these through continuously, and I'll show you how I do this. What these do after they go through, there's a box down on the floor at the end of my outfeed table here. They just drop right into a box. So I'm going to get the rest of these cut and graded, and then we'll come back and we'll start on the top bars. Okay, now we come to the fun part, and that is the top bar. We're going to start with step one here. I've got a pile of, actually they're 1-bys from a crate that a vertical mill was shipped in. So I got a combination of 1x8s and 1x6s and part of a 1x12. Your length, 19 inches. So these are all pre-cut to 19 inches. Our first step we're going to do is we're going to make a dado in each end, 5/8 in from the fence to where the dado blade starts, 3/8 of an inch wide dado in there, 1/4 of an inch deep. I'll re-aim the camera here in a second and show you how I have this set up. You need to cut that on both ends. So let me get the camera re-aimed, and before I do that, let me show you what you'll end up with. This is obviously a scrap piece, but I use this to make a test cut. When you're done, you'll have this on both ends. So let me get the camera re-aimed here and show you how this works. Okay, my dado stack in there, it's 3/4 of an inch wide, set 1/4 inch deep. That will cut this little groove up in here as I showed on this here scrap piece, so that as it passes under the feather boards, and these help to hold it down so it won't climb on the dado set. So I'll show you how to do this. I should also mention, you'll probably see me running some boards that have knots in them and knots missing. There'll be rejects as I go through this, but this is the quickest and easiest way to get this milled up. Let me get my hearing protection. We'll run a couple of these here. Okay, I'll get the rest of these run and then we'll come back for step two. This is the fun part. There's a lot of cuts on here, and some of them have to be within very close tolerances so your end bars will fit correctly. So we'll be back. Okay, got all our pieces cut. Should look like this. You have your rabbet on each end. The next step is there's a very slight taper on the end of the top bar. We're going to be cutting those next. What you'll need to do is put in a thin kerf, rip blade preferably, or a very good quality crosscut blade, high tooth count, if you're going to use that type of blade. And you need to tilt it to 5 degrees. Then you will need to set the blade height where it comes through the table saw insert to 5/8. Then you will need to space 7/16 from the fence to where the blade comes through the insert. And when you make the cut, this is my scrap test piece here, it's got the bark on it, but you'll end up with a profile that'll look like this. Get this as close as I can. So that's what you want to end up with. I'll re-aim the camera down to the fence and we'll show you how we do this. You'll also need a high fence for this because you'll be running the boards through vertically like this against the fence. So you need support up here. If you have a tenon jig, that's even better. I'm not going to go get mine, it's out in the shed. But this high fence here will work just fine. So let me re-aim the camera and I'll show you how this cut goes. Okay, here the blade is tilted at 5 degrees. The height of it is 5/8 from where it comes through the insert to the top of the kerf. Then your distance from the fence, and you're going to need to look at your blade as you're setting your width here to get the kerf on the offset that's pointed towards the fence. You'll need that to be 7/16 of an inch away from the fence here, and I'll show you how I run these. I failed to mention this before, but as you're running these through the fence, the rabbet you cut previously faces out. Okay, so I'll get the rest of these cut and then I'll get reset up and we'll go back to the next step. Okay, our next step, now that we have our rabbets cut and our tapers cut on the ends, we're going to cut these to width. Set your fence at 1 1/16 from the blade. Prefer you use a rip blade, it'll be a lot smoother and work a lot better. Obviously I'm not going to shoot a video of me ripping a whole bunch of boards up in little strips, but you kind of get the idea. You need to rip this width, 1 1/16 down the length. I'll rip these up and we'll come back and we'll get on to the next step. Okay, our next step, I'm down here on my knees, so I'll show up in the camera. We need to cut the 2 little dados on each side, on each end of the end bar. That's where the side bar will fit into. For that, we need to have 3/8 dado stack in there. This can also be done on a router table. I've done it both ways. I just prefer to do it on the table saw because dust collection works a little better here for this. You need to have this 3/32 of an inch high. Okay, that's a little hard to measure with a ruler. With the digital gauge, it's 0.094 or 0.09375 if you want to really get technical about it. You need to set your fence 5/8 of an inch from the edge of the fence to the closest side of the blade facing the fence. That needs to be 5/8. And I'll run a couple of these. We'll show you how this works. What you want to do after you get one of these cut is to check your end bar. It should be a nice snug fit. Should come up flush to the top. Be a nice snug fit, not just fall out, but you don't want to have to drive it on there either. It should just be a nice press fit like that. You need to do that on both ends of all your pieces. I usually run 3, 4, 5 of them at a time through instead of doing each individual one. It's kind of up to you. But I'm going to go ahead and run this big batch here, and then I'll be back for the next step. Okay, ready for the next step. Isn't changing blades fun? Now we're going back to just a regular thin kerf blade. You need to set that in, set it for the height of your strip here, a little better than 3/4 of an inch. What we're going to do now is cut these little bevels on the corners, these little 45-degree angles. This is actually optional. You don't have to do this, but once these are in the hive and you're trying to get in there with your hive tool, it's a lot nicer to have these little beveled corners on there. It also prevents the edges from chipping. So this is a little bit tedious to do. It's not hard. It's just kind of monotonous. What you'll need to do, once you get your blade up, you're about an inch or so, 7/8, is set your fence so that it just misses the blade. You'll have very, very little clearance between the blade and the fence. Then you need to take a miter gauge, like so, set it to 45 degrees. I will, here's one I already cut as a little bit of a test to make sure everything worked good. I will re-aim the camera and I'll show you how this works. You need to lay your bar in there so that the corner of it just touches the fence. You can also do 2 at a time if you pay attention to what you're doing. End up with it just like so. So I'm going to run through this batch. I'm only going to do about 60 here right now, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so we got all those cut. All the little ears are cut on there, and the next step, and this will depend on if you run foundation or not. If you run foundationless frames, this groove may or may not be necessary. If you put a starter strip in there, you'll need a groove. If you're going completely foundationless, you'll need to cut a little taper here. I don't know exactly what the degrees are. I assume about 7 degrees on each side till they meet in the middle to make a tapered point for the bees to start on. I don't run foundationless frames, so I don't cut those bevels. Next, I'm set up to cut this groove. You need to change to your 1/8 inch wide rip blade. Set the fence 1/2 inch away from the blade. Blade height 1/4 inch. And I have the featherboard set up here, and I'll aim the camera down so you can see how this works again. Similar to what we did when we made the bottom bars. So let me aim the camera and I'll run a few of these. Okay, same setup here. Like I said, the blade 1/4 inch high, 1/2 inch from the fence. These featherboards here will keep that down. This one here will keep it up against the fence. I'll start running them through and just keep feeding, and they drop off the end of the table into a box. Gives you an idea on how that works. I'll run the rest of these and then we'll be back. Okay, we got all the grooves cut. Little note to self is when you're going to run these off the end of the table into a box, make sure the box is there. I neglected to do that, so I ended up playing pickup sticks. But I did have the opportunity to count to see how many of these top bars I actually made. There's 106 in this batch. On the bottom bars, I didn't count them, but there's a couple hundred of them in there. The end bars from part 1 on the deeps, I know there's 240 of those. And the shallows I didn't count, but it did completely fill one of these boxes up. So I should be good to go from there. The next step, if you run wax foundation and you need a tack strip, you'll need to make one more cut on the end, set your blade to 1/2 inch high and 1/4 inch from the fence, and rip this strip off. That will become your tack strip. I run plastic foundation, so therefore I don't need to cut that off and make a tack strip. The final step then, I guess, is to pretend you've been to IKEA and you have some things to assemble. So you grab your end bars. Everything should fit just like it's supposed to. A little bit of a press fit. Put your end bar on. Okay, righter than rain and finer than frog hair, as they say. Ready for foundation. So that's how I build frames. I've got another video on an assembly jig I built. If you care to look at that, it's on my channel. Otherwise, this is the end of part 2 and how I make frames. If you enjoyed this video in this series, please give it a thumbs up. Of course, we're always looking for new subscribers, so please subscribe. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.